Guys, Mr. Sonnenberg here. Today, the lesson's called the root source. So basically, what we're talking about is how nutrients enter a plant through their roots, and so how do plants obtain the nutrients they need, and how do they hold such large amounts of nutrients, and then how do they pass it along to animals or to us, and in converted forms from inorganic compounds into organic compounds that we use. So again, this is for Science 9 students studying environmental chemistry. Topic 1 in your textbook, and this would be a good time to get some notes, paper out and start jotting down some notes for your own study purpose and such. So the first thing we need to look at is that all living things are just in constant need of raw materials and nutrients. So we need these nutrients, and what they're going to do is they're going to promote the growth of new cells, they're going to repair damaged cells, and they're just going to help us achieve, whether we're plants, animals, or humans, achieve optimal growth and optimal health. So what happens is these plants take in these inorganic compounds, and then they convert them into organic compounds. Now, just remember that our organic compounds are going to contain carbon, and that's important that we understand. So, and those are things such as our carbohydrates, our proteins, our lipids, and our vitamins. And our inorganic compounds are going to be our micronutrients and our macronutrients and trace elements that are going to be a lot of different elements that we have in small amounts, but they're very important to our function or to a functioning body. But we need to contain, these plants take in these inorganic compounds and they convert them into organic compounds. Now, consumers, so us, in consuming the plants or consuming the animals that consume the plants, so animals would be consumers as well, they use the organic compounds made by the producers of the plants for energy, growth, and repair. And that's what we do as well. So whether we consume the plant directly or whether we consume the animal that consumed the plant, we're still obtaining the nutrients through that cycle. We're taking in those organic compounds we need for these three essential areas right here. So for energy, growth, and repair. So when we take in these substances, though, we have to remember that we also take in everything else that's associated with it. So some of these other substances we take in might be harmful to us, or sometimes they're harmless. So when we look at a plant from an agricultural standpoint, and the individuals study these plants and study these crops, it's important that we understand how each element in a plant can affect it by studying it. So because if we do that, we can actually take a look at things like deficiencies and excesses. And so what's a deficiency? Well, if we look at a deficiency and an excess, well, not enough, okay? So enough. And then excess, well, that would be too much. So if we have too much of one thing and not enough of another, or maybe are they working against each other? Are they causing it? Or what's the problem? So why is this crop not growing? Why is this specific plant not producing like it should? Because producers, it's so important that we take care of them, because they are the basis of life for us, because we consume the plants, and the plants are the ones that actually take in the large amounts of nutrients. So let's take a look at a problem just from an agriculturalist standpoint. So if I see yellow striping on the lower leaves, and I take a test of the soil, and it indicates that there's an increased level of potassium, so there's a high level of potassium, but there's low level of magnesium in the plant. Well, I'm going to take a look at this data now that I understand what's going on and what the problem is, and I'm going to say that, well, obviously potassium, if there's a high level of it and low level of magnesium, obviously the potassium is interfering with the plant's ability to absorb this magnesium it needs. So what's my solution? What am I going to do to help this out? Well, I'm going to stop applying fertilizers containing potassium, as obviously it's affecting the magnesium, and I'm going to apply more fertilizer with magnesium, because I want to increase the levels of magnesium, but at the same time I don't need those high levels of potassium because they're affecting the magnesium. So this is how, from an agriculturalist standpoint, I can say, well, I've got a problem with this plant, and particularly I have a deficiency and an excess. I have an excess of potassium, but I have a deficiency and I don't have enough magnesium. So I'm going to stop applying so much potassium and I'm going to apply more magnesium to balance it out and to ensure that the optimal amounts are being met for this plant, to ensure that these problems don't continue to occur. So, but how do these enter? So how does the potassium get in? How does the magnesium get into the plant? How does it obtain the nutrients it needs? Okay, so the first process we're going to talk about is, and the first way it actually enters is this cool process called diffusion. So that is really important that we understand that diffusion is movement of particles from high concentration to an area of low concentration. So if you take a look at the diagram here, we're moving from high concentration, all these molecules in here, okay, moving to a lower concentrated area. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3. 8 to 3, we want to move them so it's balanced. We want it to be a balanced approach. We want it to have equal amounts on each side. The good thing about this process of diffusion, where we see that movement of these molecules, is that it doesn't require energy. Really important, it doesn't require energy, which is a little different than active transport that we'll look at in a second. So diffusion is, so if I have this potassium, then it's going to be moved from a high level of potassium into a low concentrated area, and it will just diffuse back and forth until there's even numbers. The second way is another form of diffusion, but it's called osmosis, so it's a special kind of diffusion. And osmosis is the process of moving these particles or molecules, elements, nutrients. They move in water because they're dissolved in water. So they're actually dissolved. So they're dissolved in water. Okay, so what happens is they actually move in this water, and as the water comes in, we actually take a concentration, a high concentration, and there's a low concentration maybe of potassium, for example, so of K, low concentration, but this movement through the root hairs, and they have these tiny little root hairs on the plant. I'll just draw that really quick. So these tiny little root hairs. So there's these big roots. Now we have the stem. And then each on these are little tiny root hairs, and what they actually do is they actually increase the surface area. So we can actually hold 10,000 times more, or not we, plants can hold 10,000 more times nutrients than the soil surrounding them, because there's so much surface area in the tiny little root hairs that they can absorb so many nutrients. So what happens is, like I said, osmosis is going to take water from high concentrated area. If you take a look at the soil down here, high concentrated H2O area, and it's actually going to diffuse through osmosis into the plant, and it's going to be transferred. But what happens is, if it takes in potassium, okay, so if it takes in potassium into a root, okay, then we get some K here, and it's going to accumulate inside, and then the water is going to go in and out, but it's going to leave the potassium on the inside. So now that potassium is going to move through the plant, and now it's obtained the nutrients it can. So that's through, it's a type of diffusion, osmosis is, but it's water, and we have dissolved minerals and nutrients in the water that actually the plant uses. So we diffuse from high concentration to low concentration, drop off the minerals and or nutrients, and then diffuses the water back out, brings more in, try to keep that balanced approach, but now the plant uses those nutrients that are brought in. And then the last little bit, or the last way we do it, is called active transport. So the plant, basically what happens is the plants need high concentrations of nutrients, and that's of some nutrients in their roots. So what happens is they hold, because there's all those root hairs, they have so much surface area, they can take in so many nutrients. So what happens is they can sometimes have up to 10,000 times more, 10,000 more or times more nutrients in their roots than they do in surrounding soil. Okay, which is it's interesting, but it's because of that surface area on the root hairs. So now, uh, how do they keep? How do they keep these high concentrations? Well, they need that high concentration. So what happens is they take from high concentration in the roots, and there's low concentration in the soil around, and they actually draw from that low concentrated area. But this process is difficult. So that process is what active transport or active transfer is. But the bad thing about it is it requires energy. So we're taking in nutrients because, well, not we, sorry, I keep saying we, but plants are taking in nutrients because they need to provide energy, but now it's using energy for active transport. Whereas diffusion and osmosis, they didn't take any, or they didn't use any energy, which was a benefit, right? So those are the three ways we can take in nutrients and minerals, and plants can take in nutrients and minerals that they need, and then they can convert them into organic compounds. But they take in these inorganic compounds through diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Now the last little bit I'm going to talk about is called what is a substrate. And basically organisms live in specific areas so they can obtain the nutrients they need. But substrate, I just want you to know what a substrate is, and it's a material in which an organism moves or lives. So sometimes organisms can attach themselves to substrates, while others just obtain the nutrients from their substrate. So we just that's basically how do we get the nutrients, how do we take them in, what is a substrate. That's basically all I wanted you to know here. Okay, so anyways, that concludes the screencast, guys. Hopefully you understand how these nutrients and such and the inorganic compounds enter the plant, and then there's a conversion that occurs that converts them into organic compounds, and then they're passed along through other animals, the consumption of plants by animals or the consumption of plants by us, or then passed along by the consumption of animals by us. And when we take them in, we actually take in those organic compounds that we need to build cells, repair cells, and help us grow, move, think, and such. So anyways, that concludes the screencast. Hope this has helped. I'll see you guys on the next screencast. Thanks for tuning in.